The American Forests by John Muir, continued from the previous part. The special land agents employed by the General Land Office to protect the public domain from timber depredations are supposed to collect testimony to sustain prosecution and to superintend such prosecution on behalf of the government, which is represented by the district attorneys. But timber thieves of the Western class are seldom convicted, for the good reason that most of the jurors who try such cases are themselves as guilty as those on trial. The effect of the present confused, discriminating, and unjust system has been to place almost the whole population in opposition to the government, and, as conclusive of its futility, as shown by Mr. Bowers, we need only state that during the 7 years from 1881 to 1887 inclusive, the value of the timber reported stolen from the government lands was $36,719,935, and the amount recovered was $478,073, while the cost of the services of special agents alone was $455,000. To which must be added the expense of the trials. Thus, for nearly $37 million worth of timber, the government got less than nothing. And the value of that consumed by running fires during the same period, without benefit even to thieves, was probably over $200 million. Land commissioners and secretaries of the Interior have repeatedly called attention to this ruinous state of affairs, and asked Congress to enact the requisite legislation for reasonable reform. But, busied with tariffs, etc., Congress has given no heed to these or other appeals, and our forests, the most valuable and the most destructible of all the natural resources of the country, are being robbed and burned more rapidly than ever. The annual appropriation for so-called protection service is hardly sufficient to keep 25 timber agents in the field. And as far as any efficient protection of timber is concerned, these agents themselves might as well be timber. That a change from robbery and ruin to a permanent rational policy is urgently needed, nobody with the slightest knowledge of American forests will deny. In the East, and along the northern Pacific coast, where the rainfall is abundant, comparatively few care keenly what becomes of the trees as long as fuel and timber are not noticeably dear. But the Rocky Mountains in California and Arizona, where the forests are inflammable and where the fertility of the lowlands remains dependent upon irrigation, public opinion is growing stronger every year in favor of permanent protection by the federal government of all the forests that cover the sources of the streams. Even lumbermen in these regions, long accustomed to steel, are now willing and anxious to buy lumber for their mills under cover of law. Some possibly from a late second growth of honesty, but most, especially the small mill owners, simply because it no longer pays to steal, where all may not only steal, but also destroy, and in particular, because it costs about as much to steal timber for one mill as for 10. And therefore, the ordinary lumberman can no longer compete with the large corporations. Many of the miners find that timber is already becoming scarce and dear on the denuded hills around their mills, and they too are asking for protection of forests, at least against fire. The slow-going, unthrifty farmers, also, are beginning to realize that when the timber is stripped from the mountains, the irrigating streams dry up in summer and are destructive in winter. That soil, scenery, and everything slips off with the trees. So, of course, they are coming into the ranks of tree friends. Of all the magnificent coniferous forests around the Great Lakes, once the property of the United States, scarcely any belong to it now. They have disappeared in lumber and smoke, mostly smoke, and the government got not 1 cent for them. Only the land they were growing on was considered valuable, and $2.50 an acre was charged for it. Here and there in the southern states, there are still considerable areas of timbered land, but these are comparatively unimportant. Only the forests of the West are significant in size and value, and these, although still great, are rapidly vanishing. Last summer, of the unrivaled redwood forests of the Pacific Coast Range, the United States Forestry Commission could not find a single quarter section that remained in the hands of the government. Under the Timber and Stone Act of 1878, which might well have been called the Dust and Ashes Act, any citizen of the United States could take up 160 acres of timber land, and by paying $2.50 an acre for it, obtain title. There was some virtuous effort made with a view to limit the operations of the act by requiring that the purchaser should make an affidavit that he was entering the land exclusively for his own use, and by not allowing any association to enter more than 160 acres. Nevertheless, under this act, wealthy corporations have fraudulently obtained title from 10,000 to 20,000 acres or more. The plan was usually as follows. A mill company, desirous of getting title to a large body of redwood or sugar pine land, first blurred the eyes and the ears of the land agents, and then hired men to enter the land they wanted, and immediately deed it to the company after a nominal compliance with the law, false swearing in the wilderness against the government being held of no account. In one case, which came under the observation of Mr. Bowers, it was the practice of a lumber company to hire the entire crew of every vessel which might happen to touch at any point the redwood belt, to enter 160 acres each and immediately deed the land to the company in consideration of the company's paying all expenses and giving the jolly sailors $50 apiece for their trouble. By such methods have our magnificent redwoods and much of the sugar pine forests of the Sierra Nevada been absorbed by foreign and resident capitalists. Uncle Sam is not often called a fool in business matters, yet he has sold millions of acres of timberland at $2.50 an acre, on which a single tree was worth more than $100. But this priceless land has been patented, and nothing can be done now about the crazy bargain. According to the everlasting laws of righteousness, even the fraudful buyers at less than 1% of its value are making little or nothing on account of fierce competition. The trees are felled, and about half of each giant is left on the ground to be converted into smoke and ashes. The better half is sawed into choice lumber and sold to citizens of the United States or to foreigners, thus robbing the country of its glory and impoverishing it without right benefit to anybody. A bad, black business from beginning to end. The redwood is one of the few conifers that sprout from the stump and roots, and it declares itself willing to begin immediately to repair the damage of the lumberman and also that of the forest burner. As soon as a redwood is cut down or burned, it sends up a crowd of eager, hopeful shoots which, if allowed to grow, would in a few decades attain a height of 100 feet, and the strongest of them would finally become giants, as great as the original tree. Gigantic second and third growth trees are found in the redwoods, forming magnificent temple-like circles around charred ruins more than 1,000 decades old. But not one denuded acre in 100 is allowed to raise a new forest growth. On the contrary, all the brains, religion, and superstition of the neighborhood are brought into play to prevent a new growth. The sprouts from the roots and stumps are cut off again and again, with zealous concern as to the best time and method of making death sure. In the clearings of one of the largest mills on the East Coast, we found 30 men at work last summer cutting off redwood shoots in the dark of the moon, claiming that all the stumps and roots cleared at this auspicious time would send up no more shoots. Anyhow, these vigorous, almost immortal trees are killed at last, and black stumps are now their only monuments over most of the chopped and burned areas. The redwood is the glory of the Coast Range. It extends along the western slope in a nearly continuous belt about 10 miles wide, from beyond the Oregon boundary to the south of Santa Cruz, a distance of nearly 400 miles, and in massive, sustained grandeur and closeness of growth surpasses all of the other timber woods of the world. Trees from 10 to 15 feet in diameter and 300 feet in height are not uncommon, and a few attain a height of 350 feet, or even 400, with a diameter at the base of 15 to 20 feet or more, while the ground beneath them is a garden of fresh, exuberant ferns, lilies, gaultheria, and rhododendron. This grand tree, Sequoia sempervirens, is surpassed only in size by its nearest relative, Sequoia gigantea, or big tree, of the Sierra Nevada, if indeed it is surpassed. The sempervirens is certainly the taller of the two. The gigantea attains a greater girth and is heavier, more noble in port, and more sublimely beautiful. These two sequoias are all that are known to exist in the world, though in former geological times the genus was common and had many species. The redwood is restricted to the Coast Range, and the big tree to the Sierra.